Chapter 1. The day Ray disappeared. For most of his 72 years, Ray Whittaker lived at the very end of a narrow road in Odd, West Virginia, a place so tucked away that almost no one outside his family knew his name. When the world finally did see him, it was through a screen. Clips showed an older man who didn't speak, who barked and grunted and flinched when strangers came too close. People reacted with shock, curiosity, even laughter. Few stopped to ask what it meant for a man to live 70 years without the words to say, "I'm scared," or "I hurt." Then suddenly, he was gone. After a report about drugs, dangerous conditions, and possible abuse of the most vulnerable family members, Adult Protective Services came to the Whittaker property. They removed 3 people, all adults with severe disabilities who had spent decades on that land. They didn't pack. They weren't eased into a new life. They were simply taken. Ray's older sister Betty was left in the doorway of a collapsing home, saying only, "I miss them a lot. I raised them." His brother Larry tried to explain what had happened, but he didn't know where they'd been taken, and the state wouldn't tell him. To some, this looked like justice. 3 vulnerable people rescued from a place that appeared unsafe. To others, it looked like a quiet abduction. A 72-year-old man who barely understood the outside world, ripped away from the only home he'd ever known. In this first episode of a 3-part series, we're going to slow that moment down. We'll step into Ray's silence, into the house he lived in, and into the chain of events that turned a hidden life into a public emergency. In the next episodes, we'll go deeper, into the family history, the addictions, the failures, and finally into 7 hard truths that will change how you see Ray, this family, and people like them. Stay with me to the end, and let me know what you think in the comments, because once you see the full picture, it's hard to look away the same way again. Chapter 2. The Man Who Couldn't Speak. Before we talk about agencies, YouTube channels, or even the house, we have to start with one fact. Ray couldn't explain his own suffering. Born in 1953, he grew up on that patch of land in Odd and never really left it. From early on, his development was profoundly different. Documentaries and reporters describe him as largely nonverbal, a man who can only communicate via grunts and barks, reacting to the world not with sentences, but with sounds. But that doesn't mean nothing was happening inside. People who've spent time with him say Ray can understand simple speech. When his name is called, he looks. When family members repeat words slowly, he responds. He follows basic instructions. His problem isn't the absence of awareness. It's that he was never given, or never developed, the tools to turn that awareness into words. So when someone stared at him, he couldn't say, "You're scaring me." He barked. He grunted. Sometimes he screamed and ran. Visitors recall that even eye contact could make him bolt. On the internet, these moments were often clipped as shock value. But for Ray, they were likely the only language he had to say. "I'm overwhelmed. I want this to stop." Researchers who've examined the Whittaker family describe a tight, tangled family tree. Identical twins whose children married each other. Parents who were double cousins. Generations of relatives marrying within the same small cluster. That kind of repeated consanguinity dramatically raises the risk of serious genetic conditions, physical differences, deafness, and severe intellectual disabilities. Ray's life fits that pattern. His brain and body were shaped by forces far beyond his control. The result appears to be a man who can grasp parts of what's happening around him, but who lives with a deeply limited ability to communicate, learn, or protect himself. His world was small. The house, the yard, the same relatives day after day. Odd, West Virginia is remote. The Whittaker home sits far from main roads, almost out of public view. There's no record in the reporting of long-term professional oversight, no regular therapist, no long-term guardian stopping by every month. For most of his life, Ray depended almost entirely on family members who were themselves aging, poor, and often impaired. His sister Betty has said she promised her mother she would never marry, that she would stay and care for her siblings instead. She later said, "I raised them," speaking about Ray and the others who were taken. So this is the starting point of our story. A man whose mind was shaped by generations of genetic pressure. A man who could feel fear and attachment, but whose whole emotional life had to pass through barks and grunts in a house far from the public eye. In the rest of this episode, we'll see what that house really looked like. Chapter 3. A House the World Ignored. To understand why officials finally acted, you have to see the place Ray lived. Reporters who visited after Adult Protective Services removed Ray, Lorene, and Timmy found more than just a poor home. They described a scatter of decaying structures at the end of a dirt road. Walls bowed, roofs sagging, rusted fences leaning over muddy ground. Outside, the yard was crowded with old tires, broken furniture, crushed cans, and trailers left to rot into the hillside. A chicken coop stood abandoned and collapsing. Inside, the danger was more direct. Journalists describe a kitchen where the stove had been left running, with congealed beans and sausage still on the burners. Flies moved over the food. The air was heavy with the smell of gas and rotting leftovers. Insects crawled across counters. Windows were cracked or broken. There was no working indoor bathroom, only an outhouse outside, itself breaking down. On the porch, decorations from different holidays still hung months later. A Halloween skeleton drooping beside a Christmas angel. It looked like time had moved on everywhere else, but not here. For any adult, this would be a dangerous place to live. For someone like Ray, a nonverbal, intellectually disabled man, it was something worse. He couldn't clearly say, "The gas smells wrong." He couldn't call for repairs or choose to move. His entire physical world was this collapsing set of rooms run by people already struggling to keep themselves afloat. That's why the house matters in this story. It wasn't just a sad background to unusual footage. It was a key reason the state stepped in. To officials looking in from the outside, it was a clear health hazard for vulnerable adults. But it was also Ray's home. These same rooms were where he sat beside Betty, where he ate and slept, where he heard familiar voices every day. The house that put him in danger was also the center of the only emotional world he knew. When the state removed him, they pulled him out of both realities at once. In the next chapter, we'll see how this hidden, collapsing world finally collided with the outside one. How cameras arrived, money flowed, chaos grew, and how one phone call turned a viral story into a state emergency. Chapter 4. When Cameras Became Sirens. For most of Ray's life, almost nothing changed. The house decayed. The family aged. His suffering stayed hidden. Then, a camera drove up the road. Around 2020, photographer and filmmaker Mark Leda visited the Whittaker family and shared their story online. Millions of viewers suddenly saw Ray, barking, grunting, recoiling from eye contact, pacing through cramped rooms and a junk-strewn yard. The videos were shocking, and they spread quickly. 2 GoFundMe campaigns raised close to $100,000, meant for repairs and living expenses. For a moment, it seemed like the cameras might finally bring help. Then came the backlash. As the views climbed, people began to question who was really benefiting. Were the family being respected or exploited? Were donations reaching them? Public disputes broke out between Mark and other creators over money and ethics. Mark eventually backed away, worried about the direction things were going. Other channels stepped in, including Patrick and Eric, and the story continued. Part documentary, part content machine. Inside the family, the pressure and chaos increased. Ray's cousin BJ, Larry's daughter, struggled with drug addiction. She sparked outrage when it emerged that she had staged a fake announcement claiming Larry had died in order to raise more money. She later admitted publicly that the fundraiser was a scam and said she wasn't proud of it. Her addiction and the misuse of donations deepened the instability of a home already on the edge. Meanwhile, the cameras kept recording. New footage showed more than just unusual behavior. Creators documented signs of ongoing drug use, worrying treatment of vulnerable relatives, and living conditions that had moved from chronic neglect toward emergency. Eric, one of the newer filmmakers, eventually decided that just filming wasn't enough. After what he saw, he called Adult Protective Services. Soon after, APS arrived and removed Ray, Lorene, and Timmy from the home. No flashing lights, no big confrontation, just a quiet car, a state decision, and 3 people driven away from their family's land. The same internet that once turned Ray into a spectacle had become the only reason authorities finally saw how he was living. The footage people clicked on out of curiosity became, in the end, the siren that forced the state to act. For a man who could never pick up a phone or form a clear plea for help, those cameras were his alarm. But when the alarm stopped and the car pulled away, a new mystery began. Chapter 5. What we still don't know. Here's what we know. Ray spent his life in a collapsing home at the end of a dirt road. He couldn't explain his fear in words. Cameras came. Money came. Chaos grew. And eventually the state stepped in and removed him from everything familiar. But there is so much we don't know. We don't know what that car ride felt like for him. The moment strangers shut the door and the only landscape he understood disappeared in the rearview mirror. We don't know what his new room looks like, or whether anyone there has taken the time to learn what his sounds mean. We don't know if he misses Betty and Larry, or if, in his understanding of the world, they simply vanished one day. We do know this. The story didn't start with APS. It began generations ago, in a family tree that folded in on itself, in a town built on poverty and isolation, in promises made by relatives who tried to care for each other with almost no support from the systems around them. In the next episode, we're going to trace that history. We'll look at how the Whittaker family became what it is, how addiction and money tore at what little stability they had, and how love and failure can exist in the same house. We'll move from what happened to Ray to why it was allowed to happen. And in the final episode of this mini-arc, we'll break Ray's journey into 7 heartbreaking truths about what he really endured. Truths that reach far beyond one family in West Virginia. Tell me in the comments what you feel right now. Anger, sympathy, confusion. Because this series isn't just about looking at Ray. It's about asking what we owe people like him, before the only time we notice them is when the camera's rolling and the car's already pulling away.